I want to become a real wizard. And Merlin here did promise to teach me.
If you grew up in the 80s, there's a good chance you're still not over a certain group of 6 kids, a carnival ride, and a strange world of dragons, dungeons, unicorns, and a dungeon master who spoke in riddles and never ever gave a straight answer. If you watched the Dungeons & Dragons animated series, I know you never quite got over the fact that it ended without sending Hank, Sheila, Bobby, Diana, Eric, and Presto home. In fact, if you're one of our regulars, you'll recall that we made a video about the ending for this show, which was never aired to us, just a few days back. And this is on us, folks, because our team was so caught up in the excitement of reliving nostalgia that we missed including a certain piece of information about the fates of the children who were trapped in the realm. Every episode, these children fought monsters, outsmarted villains, and scraped their way through impossible odds, all while chasing the same desperate dream, just getting back home. But the realm always had other plans. Then, in January 1996, tucked inside a limited edition promotional comic that TSR quietly distributed at hobby shops and conventions, our friends showed up again in a real, printed comic written by Jeff Grubb, the same guy behind the 1989 DC Forgotten Realms run. Except this time, they were no longer kids. They had grown up and settled in the Forgotten Realms after being unable to get back home. What's more interesting is that this is the only time we see these characters as adults in print, and Honor Among Thieves later canonized this too. I hope you can excuse that we were not able to include this in our original video. Consider this our way of making it up to you. Let's take a look at what happens in Forgotten Realms, the Grand Tour.
You are free to return to your world now if you wish.
Tell her we said hi.
What happens in this comic? Right away, it begins at the Old Skull Inn at Shadowdale, where Elminster the Wizard walks in and flirts a little with the barkeep, asking for something to drink. Even with his advanced age, revealed to be in the thousands, the man seems not to have lost his charm with the ladies. And the very next panel shows the 6 kids from the original cartoon sitting at the next table. They're all grown up now, and Presto seems especially excited about the old wizard's arrival. Diana remarks that even though the guy is really old, he looks sturdy enough. Eric, ever the nihilist, mentions that wizards are in the business of lying about pretty much everything, and then tells Presto that if he chickens out, they'll make fun of him for it for the rest of their lives. All this happens from Presto's perspective, so we only see his glasses until this point. He goes up to Elminster and, out of nervousness, becomes a blabbering mess. He finally manages to ask, "You wouldn't want to take on an apprentice or anything." He then turns his back, not wanting to get rejected, but the gang arrives to chat him up to the wizard, pointing out his many qualities. Elminster decides to give Presto a chance, calling him by his full name, Preston, and says that he has to go on rounds across the realms so he would be like a companion. He grabs the younger man, and in a brilliant flurry of light, they disappear from the inn, while Eric says, "That went pretty well." The magical duo ends up in the desert of Anali Rock, 500 miles to the west of Shadowdale. Elminster explains how the terrain surrounding them is rough and unforgiving on all sides. He then pulls Presto ahead, saying that there is much to see and not enough time to see all of it. Presto, however, hears something strange, like swords clashing against each other, and brings it up. To his surprise, his mentor says that there is indeed a war taking place between the orcs of the Ebon Dream, along with their ogre and direwolf allies, and the Iron Banner barbarians, who are aided by tree ants, great sentient trees, and a shaman. He also says that their help will not be wanted or appreciated, considering how both sides have engaged in ruthless violence. In fact, attempting to mediate could invite more problems for them, because the Northerners hate outsiders more than anything else. Presto naturally asks why they even came to this place, and he's given an ever-cryptic answer: to visit the past. Elminster says that thousands of years ago, before even he was born, the great wizards of Netheril used to rule over the land. This was the time of the most powerful dragons, of interclan disputes among elves, and the earth would glow like freshly minted gold, while the stars would appear to have been pulled out of a furnace. This wonderful land was filled with wizards who had the power to change the very laws of nature. Awestruck, Presto asks what happened to such a prosperous and powerful land. His mentor replies that time struck it, eroding the world, drying the land, killing all the subjects, and eventually leading to complete destruction. All those great wizards, their names are merely legend now, because no one alive has witnessed them in their prime. As Elminster rambles on with some more philosophical lessons about time being the ultimate enemy, Presto gets distracted by a huge gem and covertly takes it away with him, even though he's reminded to stay close and not to wander. Elminster points out that all kinds of creatures are lurking around the ruins, and none of them are particularly known for their hospitality. Presto innocently asks about the exact kinds of monsters that can be found there, when all of a sudden, one of them obliges his kind request by appearing right before them, fangs bared. Elminster says that it can be defeated by Presto as long as he holds on to his hat tightly and runs like there's no tomorrow. They are zapped to another place, while the old wizard drops some wisdom on his apprentice. There will always be something bigger, hungrier, and nastier no matter where they are. Then they come across a statue of King Azuan, who fought the Twigon hordes in the land of Cormyr. Elminster says that the king is on his deathbed, and political vultures have already started circling the throne, with a war of succession being very imminent. Presto wants to help and do something to defuse the situation, but he is again reminded that sometimes the best way to help is to let things play out on their own. Moreover, Elminster's colleague, Van Gardehast, is the resident mage of the land, so it's best to leave it to him. They're actually here to meet another mage, so they enter a private club filled with wizards, which surprises Presto since he always considered their kind to be unsociable loners. His mentor points out that even mages are people too, and even they need a community to rest with between their travels. He then talks of a certain mage named Volo, who is thoroughly disliked by everyone because he writes tour books with a kind of brutal honesty that people don't appreciate. They actually find the subject of their discussion sitting at one of the tables, and Presto is almost astonished that Volo has a bounty on his head just because he writes about his travels. Elminster asks him to help the young mage with some geography lessons, which he happily obliges in great detail. When the master and apprentice leave, however, two people come up to Volo and take away the manuscript that earned him the bounty, saying they had a deal. Anyway, Elminster and Presto end up at Skull Point in Waterdeep, where they meet the dark elf Kilue Velodorn. Presto is scared at first because dark elves are supposedly evil creatures, but he gets dished out more wisdom. Looks can be deceiving in the realms. Elminster asks about his other two outcast allies, Drist Duerden and Cadibri. While Kilue and the old mage talk about their contacts, the monster from the ruins comes back to attack them once more. They manage to blast it off on time, but Elminster takes his leave and zaps himself and his apprentice to another land, Termish, around 500 miles to the south of where they had started their journey. Right off the bat, the entire situation looks like a battle plan expecting an assault, which happens in a matter of seconds. Elminster hands over his staff to Presto, saying that the magic word is Zordfige, and that this time they cannot remain neutral spectators. Then, in a superbly kick-ass manner, this 1,000-year-old man runs off to take on the Priest of Madness, the assaulting party, with his bare hands. Poor Presto is left behind to defend himself against creatures 10 times his size, and even while using the spell he was just told, he nearly gets killed. After a long and tiring battle, we see Elminster take down the bad guy, but Presto sits quietly, clearly shaken by his brush with death. He is asked to get up, and almost annoyed, he asks where in the realms they're needed now. Elminster gently says that all great mages are on duty 24/7. It's basically part of the job, but for now, he was going to take Presto home. Presto says that he now understands why Elminster doesn't like taking apprentices. His work involves surveilling the realms, and it's extremely dangerous for someone who's not as seasoned in magic as he himself is. Taking an apprentice would pretty much mean giving them a death sentence. The old wizard accepts, saying that it is definitely part of why he doesn't take apprentices. But just then, the monster from the ruins once again catches up to them, with Presto screaming in terror. He's told that these creatures are very sore losers, but that was not the reason why it was chasing them across realms. Turns out that big gem Presto had picked up is the reason why it was chasing them around, and it wanted the gem back. Then Elminster says that the other reason why he doesn't take apprentices is that he does not like people taking things that are not theirs, just like Presto did. He advises the boy to stay back with his friends and learn more so that he can become a great wizard one day. He says his farewells and leaves Presto to go back to the inn to the rest of the gang, where he's promptly welcomed by his friends. They ask him about his travels and whether he is officially Elminster's apprentice, but he doesn't feel like talking about it just yet. Although he does mention that there is a place called Netheril on the other side of the desert where he saw gems the size of his fist. The group excitedly hollers at this, indicating they have found their next adventure, and this is where the comic ends, hinting that Hank, Diana, Sheila, Bobby, Eric, and Presto will set off to defeat the creatures of the ruins of Netheril and claim the gems for themselves. This 32-page comic that most people have never even heard of, and it's currently selling for less than $10 on the second-hand market, is the closest thing to an official answer this fandom ever got. The last episode, Requiem, never actually aired, so even if we know the plot that was supposed to play out, it doesn't really fall into canon territory. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, since Honor Among Thieves showed these 6 children as aged-up characters in a cameo, the only official version of what happened to the kids from the D&D cartoon is that they could not go back home and thus grew old in the Forgotten Realms, continuing their adventures. And I think there's something bittersweet about that, because if you watched this show as a kid, you have grown up now too. You know what it feels like to want something so badly. Maybe to just go back to a simpler time and realize that some doors just don't open the way you planned. What did you think about this comic? Would you have preferred a more canonical take on the kids getting back home safely, or do you like this version more? Let me know in the comments.